So, why should we study the feast of the Lord? In my study, I have found two helpful books that I want to recommend on the topic: The Feast of the Lord and Celebrating Jesus in the Biblical Feast, which gives us some good reasons why we should study the feast. There's also a book put out by Rose Publishing, Feast of the Bible. Now, by studying the Feast of the Lord, one will have a better understanding of the Bible itself, because then one will see the Jewish roots of Christianity. We also see God's plan of redemption in a much fuller way. It will lead us to greater insights of God's prophetic seasons and the importance of the role of the nation of Israel. Today, we have special days. So did the children of Israel. Consider a picture can say 1,000 words. So the Lord uses pictures to teach us about Him. So by studying the feast, we have pictures of the Messiah that help us understand Him and what He has done for us. Right in the book of Genesis, notice this passage, Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from night, and let them be for signs and for" what? Seasons, and for days and years. So from the very beginning, we see the importance of not only seasons, but certain days and years. Thus, the feasts are the seasons, or use the phrase appointed times, of the Lord, even from the beginning. Concerning the feasts, they were not primarily a cookout, but a divinely appointed time that God would meet with His people at a certain time in a certain way for a certain purpose. There are 7 feasts depict the entire redemption career of the Messiah. That's from the book, The Feast of the Lord. These feasts are found in Leviticus chapter 23, and all males were required to go 3 times a year to Jerusalem to participate in them. 4 of these feasts have already been fulfilled in Jesus, as we will see. The first 4 feasts center around Jesus' first coming, while the last 3 on His second coming. In general, there were 7 feasts in 3 different seasons of the year. First, the Passover, then unleavened bread. The first season spoke of not only having peace, but the very peace of God. The second season only contained the Feast of Pentecost. This speaks of God's power in our lives. And the last season would include the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. That last season spoke of God's rest. All of these feasts would point to the Messiah. We will look at each feast to see what was meant by them, how the Jews celebrated them, and finally how Jesus fulfills them. Very important is the background of the Jewish calendar, which is far different than the one we use today. So while our calendar is 365 and 1/4 days in a year, that adds 1 day every 4 years, it is not the same with the Jewish calendar. The Jewish day begins not at 12 midnight, but at around 6 p.m. or sundown. This comes right out of Genesis, for it says, "And the evening and the morning were the first day." Genesis 1:5. The Jewish calendar is based on the moon, 29 and a half days long, and there are 354 days in a lunar year. Thus, the Jews have to adjust their calendar so that the feasts remain in the time frame or season which they were intended. So the Jewish calendar adds a month at the end of every 3rd year. Plus, it adds a day in their 19-year cycle to the month of Adar. The years in which the day is added are as follows: in the year 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, and 19. That is why Easter is celebrated within a certain time frame, but it varies in a matter of weeks because of the Jewish calendar. There is actually more than one calendar that the Jews used. Just to know, I was surprised what was considered forbidden as work even today on the Sabbath. Check this out. On the Sabbath, there's an elevator. One is not to select a floor by pushing a button. Even flicking on a light switch is forbidden, for it is considered fire-kindling type of work. So, the The first calendar we want to look at is the sacred calendar. This calendar was based on when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, beginning with the feast of Passover. The time of this calendar would begin at around our March to April of our calendar today. Then there was the civil calendar. This calendar was based on the children of Israel's agricultural season, which the time of this calendar is our September to October of our calendar. So the early rains prepared the ground for plowing in October to November. That would follow by the sowing of wheat and barley seed in November to December. Then the winter rains happened from December to January. That was followed by the blossoming of the almond trees in January and February. The citrus harvest was in February and March. Then in the spring, March and April was the beginning of the barley harvest. Then there was a dry season from April and May up until September and October. Though the barley harvest happened in the spring, the wheat harvest was in May, June. The grape harvest was in June, July, while in August was the time of the olive harvest. Finally, the harvest of figs and dates happened in August, September. So the harvest did not happen for everything all at once. So the Passover, for example, as well as unleavened bread and first fruits were celebrated during the barley harvest. Pentecost occurred 7 weeks later during the wheat harvest. The last part of the civil calendar was the harvest of figs and dates, though the olive harvest happened in August. Celebrating Jesus in biblical feasts says this, quote, "Through our study of the feast, we will learn that God's plan for working out his redemption has a definite beginning and a definite process and a definite conclusion," end quote. And I will be quoting from both books. I'll just be saying these are from the books, and I'll give a quote as we go through the different feasts. In conclusion, while we have the days of the week, for example, Sunday, Monday, etc., the Jewish days of the week were actually by their number, 1, 2, 3, etc., except for the last day of the week, which is called the Sabbath. It was set apart, and thus it is the only day which was named by God for the purpose of rest, as he did in creation. Some of the feasts began with a Sabbath of rest, and many have ended with the Sabbath, even though it was not the end of the week. Remember, the Sabbath was the last day of the week. For some Sabbaths are actually part of a feast of the Lord, depending on the feast.